So as we start again, I'm going to ask Jonan to just lead this the presentation of the first slide. So what we've found with this work where we've developed it in Australia and New Zealand is that when you take the concept to another country like the Philippines or Saudi Arabia or any other country, you have to look at the local ordinances, the local laws, the local planning frameworks, and contextualise it. So late last year I asked Jonan to do that for the Philippines, which he did. He looked up how things work and from his own knowledge before as well, and put together this slide and this framework so that you could see how the two things, the asset management from the international manual and the Filipino LGU planning frameworks work together.
Mayong agagid sa tanan. Bugtaw ba kamo dira? Well, good to know, and thank you for the opportunity to come up with this contextual or comparison between the international standard and the Philippine context. And way back in 1993, I had the opportunity to monitor, to be part of the process monitoring research in the implementation of the 1991 Local Government Code. And what I did, I just read the updates, and this is what I found. Probably this is familiar with you, Vince. I got it from the local planning illustrative guide, and have a look at what stage of this guide or this process the IIMM or the International Infrastructure Management process or framework would apply. And since the comprehensive land use plan is more of a legislative, so we're not going to touch on that. But what we are looking at is the multi-year, multi-sectoral development plan, which is 6 years, or it is the Comprehensive Development Plan, CDP, which is composed of the social development, economic development, environmental infrastructure, and then the, I can't read that one, institutional development. And also the next one that would also be covered is the term-based agenda, which includes the executive legislative agenda, which is in itself is a plan that is like coterminous with the local elective official. One term is 3 years, and I think, is it still a 3-year term or 2? 3-year term. 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. And then the next one is the implementation instruments of the comprehensive land use plan. Well, anyway, we won't be dealing with really with the portion of the Philippines, the CDP, but we will try to explain it in the aspect of how does it look with the framework of the IIMM. And I give back the mic to Ross. Yeah, get your mic there.
Thank you, Jonan. So Jonan carried on the integration points between the two. What we find when we look at these frameworks versus local legislation, local planning requirements, is there's almost always a match, because the need for planning for municipalities or for provinces or for governments really doesn't change for infrastructure from one part of the world to the other. You just have your own local requirements. And so what Jonan did was taking the colour coding on that table there, was then applying it through these areas here, and just noted that for each area there were a number of cross-integration points with the international manuals. So what we found is that, I don't want to go into this in detail, the slides there's a lot of information there if you want to have a look at it later. But the corporate planning and the infrastructure planning and the financial planning all fitted together reasonably well within the Philippines Comprehensive Development Plan local government unit requirements. And so we were reasonably confident as the Philippines government starts implementing asset management frameworks that it will fit well within the existing legislative and local government practice. With the main, I guess, crossover being the comprehensive development plans. And it will fit inside corporate planning strategies as well. So this series of slides here is really just showing where those integration points are against the existing. And again, just flicking back to that one, the colour coding is the levels shown in an initial slide. So the integration points is mainly with the comprehensive development plan process. The International Infrastructure Management Plan roadmap is a very good fit with that process. So it's not something new, it's you would think of it as additional practice within the CDP process. The planning areas within the CDP process are very similar to the IIMM planning areas. So again, a good match and fit there. And so I think it could be adapted quite easily to Philippine government and municipality processes. And assist in progressing planning standards and practices as a result of that. So what I did was earlier in the week is I grabbed some CDPs, including the Iloilo one, and also some master plans, a couple of the Manila Metro one, and there was a master plan here again for Iloilo. And I said, just looking through the table of contents and the information and looking through what you would expect in an asset management plan, how similar are they and where do they overlap? And the first thing is that there is an overlap between them. The common areas are the growth, the legal requirements, risks and climate adaptation, capital investment planning and work programs. What's additional in the asset plans is around the renewal planning, more detail of services to be provided, operations and maintenance, and the optimised decision making, and maybe a bit more about the management of assets and cost of service provision, which you would typically find in an asset plan. But they're not one or the other. I think they're quite complementary to each other and quite able to be adapted. Don't worry too much about the flow chart. The text is a little bit small, but this is the sort of, I guess, the chapter headings in an asset management plan that you would typically find. The one around sustainability isn't in the manuals yet. We've got ahead of the rewrite of the manual, but you would start with an introduction. You would describe the services that you're providing, excuse me, your strategy, goals, objectives, procedures, that includes your legislative requirements. Then you would detail levels of service. I'm going to take you through some slides about what levels of service actually are. Look at the demand and future planning. That is going to be a major challenge throughout the Philippines, given the population growth and also traffic growth and standards growth for provision of services. Look at your risks, and that includes your earthquake and calamity risks. Look at your climate adaptation and sustainability. Then you move on to, right, well, knowing all of that, what do I need to do to manage the total life cycle of my assets? What procedures and practices do I need to put in place to do that? The financials is, well, what's it all going to cost and when? And sometimes in New Zealand now we're pushing those numbers out to 30 years. We have the first 3 years are very tight numbers. We know them very well. That's the projects. Out to 10 years is better. Out to 30 years is more of a forward look, but obviously a lot of things change in 30 years. And then your appendices is just detailing any detailed information that you want. The other thing with asset plans, when I did the first asset plans for the municipality I was working for way back in 1997, I thought to myself, right, I'm going to do these asset plans and then I'm going to go back to real work, which to me was building stuff. go and build some more roads and bridges and water supplies. And what you realise when you start this process is that you don't know very much at all. And you have to make an awful lot of assumptions. And then you go, because you're an engineer, you go, well, actually, I want to deal with some of those assumptions. I'm not actually that happy that I had to guess 90% of my materials and 100% of their condition. And you can start at that point, but then you want to add some science to it. So you start dealing with the assumptions and do it on a risk basis. So the things that will, if they broke, cause you the most problems, you go and inspect them and find out what's actually happening with them. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world, there's never enough money to deliver the services that people want. So there's always a tension there between, I have to build this much, I have to maintain this much, but where's the money coming from? Doesn't matter where you are. And there's always change. And that's why 20 odd years later, I'm still writing and reviewing asset management plans, because the levels of service change, your understanding of risk changes, a region or a city can be growing or declining, or areas of it can, and the assets you need to deploy change with that. Your understanding of managing the life cycle of your assets changes, and your ability to optimise the information, the computer programs you're using change as well. At the end of the day, this whole process, I like to say it's applied common sense. You're taking data that you've collected, factual data hopefully, or assumptions that you will test at some stage. You're turning that data into information. And I think we're pretty good at that as engineers. We can analyse, we can create information. But the infrastructure asset management, the objective is to have informed decisions and have wisdom with those decisions. So there's a process, and what you're trying to do is inform your communities, your politicians, your senior staff, decision makers, with good data and good information that they can make, or you can recommend good informed decisions about what the optimal path forward is. Not necessarily the cheapest path forward, but the optimal path forward. So one of the things that we've been doing in New Zealand lately is we had a major failure of a water supply. We made 5,000 people very, very sick. Consequently, four people died. They were elderly people who were in poor health, but being made very, very sick by drinking bad water didn't help them, and they passed. And we had all sorts of inquiries about that. I've been involved with some of those. And it forced us to think, as the outwash of that, why are we doing this? Why do we have this asset? So for roads and transport assets, the reason that you have them is for mobility. And when you think your way through what does mobility mean, and you could say the same for aircraft and airport assets, for ports as well, all of those transportation type assets. It's about the ability to go from one place to another, or to take produce or goods from one place to another. And so obviously very bad congestion, for argument's sake, really impacts on your mobility and your decisions around mobility. With public water supplies, at the end of the day, the reason human beings, even going right back to Persian and Roman times, they were put in for public health. They're put in so that you can control the water that people are accessing, and that they can have water for washing, and have water for sanitation, and have water for drinking. And that's around maintaining public health. For sewage, wastewater, it's around public health again. And we all know of examples of informal areas where there's no sanitation, and there'll be more disease if you track disease there, because the children will be getting in contact with the waste or the sewage and maybe picking up diseases. But it's also to protect the environment. We treat sewage or wastewater to protect the environment, not to obviously you dump a whole lot of wastewater into a river or a coast or a lake, it will damage the environment. So stormwater and flood protection is around people, because a big uncontrolled flood can impact people or drown them. It's around protecting property. It's also around protecting the environment. Because often those systems will have rubbish or metals or hydrocarbons in them, and if you can clean that out, then that makes the river or the discharge. And I heard last night from our taxi driver, actually, that the river here in Iloilo has won an award for being clean and having been cleaned up. So that is really good. Parks and facilities, and in New Zealand that's sports facilities and swimming pools and playing fields, basketball courts, all of that sort of stuff. They're there for livability. And I don't know what it's like here in the Philippines, but in New Zealand, those often struggle to get the money they need to provide the services that they want, because all the money gets spent on roads and water and sewage and stormwater, and the municipalities have got no money for our parks and facilities. But how you feel about where you live is about the facilities and the parks, because that's the green space, that's the Esplanade walk down the river. If you walk down there, you go, oh, Iloilo's a lovely place to live. I feel good about living here, because you have recreation spaces. So all of these assets that governments and governments and municipalities own and manage have different purposes. And when you have a clear view as to what the purposes of those assets are, it helps you focus your expenditure and focus your efforts to achieve those purposes. There's a picture of someone in a field with a dog, so I thought that was good. And that's more around the livability. In New Zealand, we had the situation a while ago where each local government unit set its own standards for roads as to what roads were important or not. That diagram's hard to read, it's small, but what we did was we ended up with a national service level that everybody agreed on every road. So we had access roads and then collector roads and then national roads and then main highways. And they have a set of the things going across all the criteria that set that. And it doesn't matter where you are in New Zealand now, if you're on an access road, the standard should be the same. If you're on an arterial or a collector, the standard should be the same. And it's taking time to move to that, but that's where we're heading. That's a photograph of Mount Cook, which is our highest mountain from the visitor centre, just to encourage you to come some of the beauty of New Zealand. But with our one network road classification, our national transport levels of service, the criteria are that the roads must be good value for money, that they must be safe, they must be resilient to calamities and to earthquakes and things like that. The amenity is about the usability of them. Travel time reliability is a criteria, and that people can have access. And those are we have lots of sub-levels of service under those ones, but they are the main headings. Now, in Auckland, our biggest city, and in Wellington, our capital city, travel time reliability is a big issue, just like Manila and sometimes rush hour and Iloilo. You get congestion. A road that if you were going at a normal time might take you half an hour, all of a sudden it's going to take you an hour or 2 hours. That's what that measure is about. It's about, well, okay, if that's the case, how can we change the roads or add to the roads or put a new road in to improve the reliability of travel time. For water utilities, so this is water, wastewater or sewage and stormwater, these are the big high-level service levels that we use, which is the safeguarding public health and safety is the first one. Managing the environmental impacts is the second. Water networks and wastewater systems always have breaks and blocks. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. So you have to be able to respond to those and fix them when they happen, and communicate well with your public. Interestingly enough, I've had a look at, I know that Manila Metro is franchised, but they have a Facebook page and a very good communication when things are happening. There's stuff up on their Facebook page, and I think they've won some awards for how well they communicate. Because people, if your water suddenly stops working, you actually want to know why. Is it my part, or is it the city's part, or is it just our street, or is it road, or is it the whole city? So it's that level of communication. Or if there's a problem, hey, don't drink the water, we've got a problem. It's that sort of communication. And then also, people want to know that you're spending the money wisely and not wasting it. So those sorts of things. The other thing with service levels is, and this comes back to that very good question that we had about historic buildings, is you have specialty assets. For the engineers here, that little footbridge cost a fortune. It has that hoop across the top is one of the chords of the bridge, and then there's another one that runs flat across the bottom here. I've actually walked across it. So there's a cord that runs here, and then that's the other cord for the bridge, and then the whalebones, they're supposed to be whalebones, are actually the structural support of the bridge. So it's actually quite an interesting structure from a point of view, and that's one of our volcanoes that's got a decent-sized town beside it. So it's called Mount Taranaki. And the cone could collapse and a laha could wipe the town out. So we just like rolling the dice in New Zealand and seeing how our day goes. But what they wanted to do was build this iconic bridge, walk bridge and cycle bridge, so that people could see the mountain through the bridge. But that bridge needs completely different maintenance from a normal bridge, a normal walk bridge. So you need to paint it more regularly, and you need to inspect it for rust, and because it's right on the coast, so it's right near to the sea as well. And a big suspension bridge like the new one in Boston, again, has, they become quite iconic, but they have quite different maintenance and operating requirements to a normal bridge. And so the point I just wanted to make with bridges and, say, historic buildings is that you deal with them individually. You don't group them with everything else. You say, right, they're different. We have to do different stuff with them. So I want to talk to you about the Philippines' growth. I stole that picture off the internet, by the way, just so you know. I put in happy Philippines family, and there were pictures. So that's apparently what the internet says a happy Philippines family looks like. So this growth from 110 million to 145 million in the next 30 years is 35 million people in 30 years. It's 1.2 million people a year. I looked up, I said, okay, what's Metro Iloilo? And it's about 1 million people. So if you think about the population growth in the Philippines, you are adding 1 Metro Iloilo per year for the next 30 years. And if you think about the broader Metro Iloilo area and think about the amount of infrastructure and housing that you have, that's what needs to be added, sort of, as a loose concept every year. So that has implications, the amount of population growth. It has implications particularly for housing. It has, and good news for CPU and for San Augustine and other universities. It has implications for tertiary education and elementary and high school. It certainly has implications for transportation networks, because there could be more cars and more people on the roads. Water and sewage networks will need to be extended, or you're going to have higher-rise buildings. There's economic implications for that, and obviously in terms of providing municipal services, lots of implications there. One way of looking at it would be to say that's a huge problem. The way you could see from the heading of the slide, I would say it's a huge opportunity. And the reason, going back to that slide I had from The Economist that shows the Philippines population being the 10th most populous country in the world, you are going to have a well-educated, English-speaking, good English-speaking, vibrant population. You've got Filipinos all over the world, so you've got good networks for commerce and things like that. And your middle class is growing. I mean, Jonan has been commenting for the last 2 days, wow, look at all the stuff in 8 years that's happened in Iloilo. It's different from where I was. There's new malls, there's new roads. That's what happened. So you fast forward 30 years, there's going to be this incredible prosperity in the Philippines. Need engineers to build all that, which is great if you're studying engineering and planning and all of those things. But there is, this level of growth creates challenges to meet it, but also huge opportunities in your careers, huge opportunities to support your country going forward. Could I encourage you to be involved? Even if you end up working outside of the Philippines, send information back, send ideas. If you're here, be involved, because they're good challenges, but yeah, there's just this very, very bright future ahead for the Philippines, I think. This is New Zealand's age population structure. Interesting thing, 2 main points here. We've got the number of children in New Zealand, so that's 1970, this is 2060 projection. Back there, 30% of the population was children, here 16%, but the same number. So we still need the same number of schools, but just not the same percentage. Our working age population is just trucking through. The elderly is the really thing. You know, so back here, 5 or 6% back in 1970, 27% by the time we get to 2060. That is reflective of the entire Western world. So you're going to have a lot of people who are retired, who are elderly, who need support and care. New Zealand's actually late to that. If you want to look at early, go look at Japan, where there's an awful lot of elderly people. And it has impacts on the way you do society. I couldn't find the same thing for the Philippines, but I looked at a population pyramid, and what you can see, and what I noticed coming from New Zealand to the Philippines this week, is the number of children. There are just children everywhere, which is a wonderful thing. You know, that means you've got families, you've got children, you can educate them, you can have lots of workers in your society. I see the smiles, and I'm sure you have your own debates about whether lots and lots of children are a wonderful thing or not. But go to a country where there's hardly any children, and you will notice the difference. Who does the work if there's no children growing up and getting educated? And so that's why I say the Philippines has these tremendous opportunities, because there's so many children growing up to be young adults like yourselves, being able to be educated, go on and serve your own country or other countries with the skills that you have. And that is what the Philippines is bringing to the world. And that means there's massive opportunities for education as well. When you start looking at children as a burden, it's a different story. I think children are a massive opportunity. If everybody in this room, if our parents hadn't thought that children were an opportunity, we wouldn't be here. So we have to think of it that way. But anyway, there's a huge contrast between the Philippines and Western countries, including New Zealand. We are getting old quite quickly, whereas the Philippines is quite young in terms of its population, and that creates tremendous vibrancy and tremendous opportunities. But it also means that you've got, you know, lots of houses to build and roads and things like that. This figure here, a couple of years ago, I did a presentation to our regional business, and I was looking at it from a New Zealand point of view, but it actually applies very much here as well. So going back to the Economist graph of the Philippines going to the 10th largest population, this was looking at individual cities and saying what cities in the world have the most growth momentum, you know, they're really happening. And 50 years ago, that would have been cities in Europe. You would think Paris or London or Berlin or, you know, those are Rome. And when you look at this, there's a couple in the top, this is the top 30 cities, but look at where the growth and dynamicism is this arc here. And Manila is included in that at number 19, it is, of the 30. But also, if you look at, I'm sure it is not escaping you that the Philippines is sitting right in the middle of that arc, nice and close, your neighbours, to where all the world's most dynamic cities are. And it's a different way of thinking, because we think, oh, it's the US and it's the Europe. It's not. It's Asia and India. And you're nice and close, which means you can provide services, you can provide products. Yesterday we were showing through the packaging department here at the university, and some really innovative stuff. You can provide packaging to all those dynamic cities, those sorts of things. So one of the things that the Philippines is particularly well placed is to service the world's growing and dynamic cities, which don't happen to be in Europe anymore. Their cities are stable or declining. So you're living in a world of opportunities that all you have to do is decide what you want to grasp. So returning to, and again, it's a challenge. Climate change coming is a challenge, but the climate has always changed and people have always survived. So we just have to put our brains to it and work out how to adapt and things like that. So within the asset management framework, we could put the studies around climate adaptation in risk, or you could put them in as a separate box. And I noticed with the comprehensive development plans I was reading that there's starting to be discussion around climate adaptation in those plans, so that's good. The Philippines has some particular risks around climate. It is the third most vulnerable country in the world to sea level rise and extreme weather events. That does not mean flee to the US, okay? They have their own challenges as well. But there are vulnerabilities. Out of the 20 biggest Asian cities that are vulnerable to climate change, was it 8 of them are in the Philippines, including Iloilo, because you're not right next to the coast, and you obviously can get hit by typhoons as well. And if you get a metre of sea level rise, which I think is quite plausible, given thermal expansion of sea level and ice melt, and you think about if the river was a metre higher and the sea's a metre higher and then you get a typhoon come through, it's going to be interesting. And what the science predicts is that we're going to get this, this is over the next century, so it's not tomorrow, but higher sea level, more frequent large typhoons, floodings, landslips, and conversely probably more drought. So that means you need to secure your water supply, and I understand there's a big dam going in here in this province, and those sorts of things. Now, the urban informal settlements, particularly the ones down by the coast or on the rivers, are particularly vulnerable. And I know Iloilo's already been doing some work around that, but I think sort of looking in from the outside, for the Philippines, if you can resolve the urban informal settlement challenges, you will resolve a lot of your climate adaptation challenges, because that's where the people are most vulnerable to getting killed or maimed or drowned or whatever. That's really easy to say. I know what the numbers are for urban informal settlements. You know, one of the things you go look and it says there's a lot of people in the Philippines living in urban informal settlements. But you have your own examples already of relocation. Singapore has been a very, very good example where they have built government-supplied housing, relocated informal settlements to that housing, and then provide the people the opportunity over 20 or 30 years to buy the house from the government. And so you're building economic security for the people who might not have a very good income to start with. They then have a permanent address in a reasonable housing situation. They can get education, they can get jobs, and away they go. So what I would suggest is that sort of looking at that overall framework within that, you're going to do a lot of work on building houses. Probably a lot of it will be government sponsored or local government unit sponsored or province. Maybe it would be funded from outside of the Philippines through foreign investment or whatever, but people need housing. And people that are living along rivers or coasts are very, very vulnerable to these changes. But the thing I would again challenge you is it doesn't have to be like it was. Think about something new. Think about different ways of providing housing, and that will go back to engineering again now, aren't we? Are there different structures? Can they be built quicker or more for less money? Because there's a lot of work to do in that area, and it solves more problems than just the housing problem. So there is already government departments in the Philippines that are doing climate risk action, and I know at the province and even local government unit level that is happening. It's just a case again of cascading planning documents, so developing climate resilience strategies and then implementing them, integrating the response right through the government levels in the Philippines. Come back, implementing. It's no use having strategies if you don't implement them. You know, that just is a piece of paper that sits on a shelf or props the door open at that point. But and then integration of the climate resilience and adaptation into your comprehensive development plans, your master planning, and your AMPs if and when you adopt them, and any other planning frameworks. And resolving these issues associated with the urban informal settlements, I think you'll make significant progress. And coming up with funding models that work. And I suspect that, like everywhere else in the world, you're going to have discussions around equity and fairness and how things get funded and how is it afforded and all of those sorts of things. They're not impossible to solve. They are intensely political discussions. But they are discussions that every country will have to have. And the thing is, keep an eye on what other people are doing, because you can innovate in that as well and come up with some answers. It's not, I think when you look at the media and as an engineer, I guess what annoys me is people making claims that the world's going to end in 10 or 12 years. We've got some challenges, but it's challenges over a century, over 100 years. If you think back to 1920 in the Philippines and you said, oh, what's the Philippines now versus 1920, a different country. Lots of different things have been built, more people, all of those sorts of things. So you fast forward 100 years, say, where could the Philippines be in 100 years' time? It will be a different country again. And so it's about incrementally making your way forward with these things. There's an old saying in the West that Rome wasn't built in a day. It was built over 1,000 years. And so countries and cities are built over long periods of time and change over, sometimes quite rapidly, but also over long periods of time. So just talking about how you would action on climate change using this asset management pyramid again. At the top, at the strategic level, you'll have your climate change mitigation and adaptation strategies that may well, I think, are going to get driven by the national government. At this tactical middle level, you have your comprehensive development plans, master plans, and AMPs. Down at the operational level, what are we doing this year? What are we going to build this year? What are we changing this year to provide resilience against climate change and to manage the risk to people's lives and things like that? So, that's it. More questions?
Okay, we're done with part 2. So, any question from the floor? Yes, sir.
I would like to ask what is the government structure of New Zealand compared to the Philippines? My observation on the Philippines is the people is not the government.
We're very, very democratic in New Zealand. We swap places with Denmark every second year as being the least corrupt country in the world. So we have virtually no corruption in our government systems, which is perhaps a little bit different from here. by reputation, no personal experience of that. And so our government, we have a national government, we have provincial government, regional government, but they're local government, but they look after environmental and rivers. And then we have local government units that look after a range of things. So it is quite different from the Philippines. And so you create different, within your own structure, you create units or departments to deal with new issues. So I'm sure the Philippines government is, I know they're working on climate change issues. But every country starts from different places as well, in terms of how they develop their government. So our government was transplanted from the British system and has then adapted from there. So the Queen is still our head of state, the Queen of the UK. So, and she has a Governor General, but it's a ceremonial rather than a practical arrangement. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any more question from the students especially? You heard about New Zealand experience on asset management. Okay, sir, again.
I would like to ask, what is your idea of optimization in New Zealand? And is climate change a factor in optimization? And how do you compare optimization in New Zealand and in the Philippines?
Okay, so we are running, particularly in transportation, we have quite advanced optimization programs using risk trade-off models and condition trade-off models as well. And we've had a national program of doing that, which has been owned by the Engineering Society, essentially, but co-funded by government. And also input from university research into ongoing building of that. In water utilities, less so. We're starting to do more of that. Climate adaptation is only just starting to find its way into our optimisation procedures. It will come through the risk modelling, I think, where you go, hey, the higher or lower risks. So it's early days on the climate adaptation for us in terms of building into our optimisation models. And yeah, that's probably because of the earthquakes. We've spent a lot more effort in the last decade on earthquake strengthening and analysis and optimisation of structures and buildings to earthquakes, as opposed to worrying so much about climate change. The climate change, we've just passed, our government has just passed a zero carbon bill. So we've got a whole lot of work going on around zero carbon achievement, and we're starting to get quite a lot more coastal erosion. So we're starting to lose roads and sometimes parts of towns to coastal erosion. So that's forcing the conversation around what you do. And a very simple example, there's no point if you've got a town that's going to, in 10 years' time, won't be there because of coastal erosion. There's no point in building a new road there or fixing a water supply or a sewer network, because it'll be gone in 10 years. So it's that sort of building, that sort of thinking, and then, well, if we're going to lose the town anyway, do we relocate now and save the money on the infrastructure? So, but that's the easy part of the conversation. What do you do with people's lives, and what do you do with the equity that they have in their assets when it's going to get lost to erosion or landslip or whatever? That's the hard discussion. And we have a lot of coastal seaside. We go to the seaside for holidays in New Zealand. So there's a lot of seaside holiday, and some of them have grown into millions and millions. They're very expensive properties. Rich people own them, and some of them are going to get inundated, and they won't be able to insure them. And so yeah, there's very complex discussions going on. Victoria University, which is our university in our main, in our capital, they have a public policy unit that's been doing research on that issue around the social equity issues with climate adaptation. I think that's where the real difficulty is around equity issues of losing towns or cities or parts of them to climate, and how do you manage that, and how do you manage the investment equity? It's not easy.
Okay, so maybe I'd like to get some, on the Philippine part, for example, how is, the question was, how is optimization done in the management of assets for Transpo? Okay, so can I ask somebody from the LGU or Sir Evan to shed light on, on the Philippine context?
I'm Evan Arias. Good morning. I am an alumnus of CPU and also presently a part-time faculty with the graduate school. Wish to share that in the Philippine context, this is what we learned. I was part of a project by the Australian Embassy 5 years ago, and we dug into the dynamics of road transport management in the country. And we found out a lot of things. Number one is asset management is not practiced in the country. It is the least and even the most neglected part. People are more on local governments and even national government. It's more on building and constructing and not maintaining. There's no culture of maintenance. And in fact, one indicator is that road assets or the roads are not booked as assets in the local government. Previously, our project advocated for it, and we're happy to know that recently it's already mandated by the Department of Management and Department of Finance. So they are now mandated, the local governments are now mandated to book roads as assets. And there was a local road asset management plan prepared under the ILG. And we're glad to know of these developments. And we're glad to be part in advocating for it. But the basic difference, as what Ross presented between the Philippines and the New Zealand context, is that asset management and maintenance budgets are already part of the system, unlike in the country. Yeah. So this is one thing that we need to really advocate for. No? Ideally, and in a perfect world, that's what I'm saying always, in a perfect world, we should have really asset management and maintenance. But it's unfortunate that life cycle of a project, an infrastructure project, it's not a consideration here at present. We're still hoping, and we're not losing hope, that someday things will change. And it will not only be build, but also build, manage, rehabilitate, and then again, the cycle. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, from the LGU.
Yeah, also on infra asset management. In the LGU, like most local government units here, infrastructure is achieved through procurement. We buy the goods and then we construct. The policy is the lowest bidder. What is your, in the case of New Zealand, then what can you share in the modes of implementing infrastructure?
We've done lowest bidder for a long time, and sometimes we get the result we deserve from the lowest bidder. So we've started moving to what we call quality price trade-off bidding. So you're looking for the quality that can be achieved versus the price that's offered. We've also, the World Bank have, for transportation particularly, a performance managed contract framework. And for our major roading networks that are owned by the government, we've moved over to those sorts of frameworks. So the contractor is paid for delivering a level of performance, not necessarily for inputs. They're paid for, they're called output specified performance contracts. and they're used by the World Bank all around the world. So we're moving across to output. We have moved across to output specified performance contracts rather than lowest price. But this is more for maintenance, not for new build. With the new build stuff, we're getting quite short on resources in New Zealand because everybody's getting too old, including contractors and engineers. So we've started going more to alliancing type contracts. So where you have the municipality or the government will form an alliance with the contractor to deliver a longer term program of work, and generally the contractor will bring a range of skills, but they're open book, so there's a specified profit for delivery of services. So we're playing around with lots of different procurement methodologies as our understanding grows. Yeah. But I think internationally those performance specified contracts are the preferred model.
That's good. Thank you, sir. At least we have some insights on that one. And for Sir Evan, again, to give focus.
So it's actually like an iteration that for road projects or any project for that matter. So the cost is not the only criteria that should be that it should be awarded to a contractor. So, kamo, you students are here. You will become the next in line leaders. So I hope that you get to have the idea, no, that you need to do also this asset management. So you complete the cycle, not just build, 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 as what Engineer Dr. Arias has said. In my knowledge, in terms of transportation, diba? One of the specializations of civil engineering is transportation engineering. We actually have national society, so we call it TSSP, and that is the Transportation Science Society of the Philippines. So this is a group made up of not only civil engineers but also of social science groups. No? So if you want to communicate with people who has the same vision as yours, then you could, in terms of transportation, then this is like the group that is on the research side of our transportation infra. Okay, so that is what I know of in terms of the transportation sector. No? Although we do have a lot of government agencies also to handle the transportation sector. So I hope as an institution, no, and we are getting into that we collaborate with industries, with LGUs. We have MOAs with them also in terms of making research project. And I think the university even now is into policy research. No? So we want, as an example, we currently have a fire engineering research. So a mall is being surveyed. Actually, we already had done the survey. So the survey is to address or to investigate or to observe the behavior of mall people. For a week, we stayed at one mall and we had like surveyors to do that. So during a disaster, so how would they behave, especially fire? So the research is, because our mentor is from Hong Kong and he's actually the one also doing some policies for their fire code in Hong Kong. So in a way, that behavior, because the fire, our exits, for example, may not be ideally located in that one. So it's a look into also our fire code later. So it's a long process, but we are sort of doing something. We are pioneering with one mall here, and we will have the results by February, I think, for that research. Okay, so we are into policy research according to our university agenda for research. Okay.
Thank you.
Any more question?
This question really is for the benefits of the students. The education system of New Zealand, I have observed that some of our nurses has to undergo schooling before they would be hired by New Zealand.
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know because I'm not a nurse. We have, it's the same with the doctors. So they have professional associations in New Zealand. Engineers are the same that have essentially standards that they require. Now, in engineering, there's the Sydney Accord and the Dublin Accord, which cross-credit qualifications, but the Philippines university system isn't inside those accords. I think it's a Washington Accord as well. And so there's a need to essentially cross-credit qualifications, and sometimes you have to do some extra study just to come to a recognised standard. But one thing I do know for sure, we're going to end up with a lot more Filipino engineers and doctors and nurses in New Zealand, and we're going to have to come up with a better way of doing it than we're doing it at the moment. I'm not sure the way of doing it at the moment is particularly good. So,
you mean to say that the standard of New Zealand is more stringent than the United States?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that our professional societies have gates that they force people to go through. I'm not saying the standard's higher or lower. I just think it's around gatekeeping by professional societies.
Thank you.
Okay, any more question? Yes? At last from a student. In behalf of the students, you'd like to ask the question.
Hi, good morning. I'm Froilan Tanque, fifth year civil engineering from CPU. So if we would like to apply as a civil engineering in Australia or in New Zealand region, we will, what qualities or qualifications are needed?
Well, Jonan's probably better. He cross-credited his qualifications. In New Zealand, there's a thing called the New Zealand Qualifications Authority, and you submit your qualification from anywhere in the world, and they then say this is equivalent in New Zealand, and so that is how it's done, and it depends on what individual qualification you hold as to what credit you've got.
On that line, maybe I'd like to request Pastor Jonan to just share how you came about to work in Ross Company.
Okay, I hope that you won't quit your course after hearing what I will be saying. Because I'm not a good engineering student. No, I'm a good engineering student because some finish it in 5 years. I finish it at 6. And while I was studying, my interest is more into writing. So I wrote news and articles for CPU engineer. So there is that desire for me to really write. And when I started my job, it's about research, and there was this institutional side of irrigation and infrastructure, which I thought there's no field anywhere during that time. And then this asset management, and here I realized that it's not only about designing and building, and I thought I could fit into this sort of area of civil engineering. And just like what Ross said, that all we need is to have our credits recognized. And New Zealand qualification authority recognized me with level 7, 6 years, and that's really cool. And that enabled me to work with Ross. And of course, apart from it, you need to get a visa to be able to stay in New Zealand, which is through the immigration process. But basically, with the need for civil engineers and other fields of engineering, there's a need in New Zealand and perhaps on the other parts of the world as well. And of course, as part of my inspiration to all of you, and as what my classmate, Dr. Evan, said, asset management is not really being applied or being really like focused on. And with upcoming endeavors, with what Ross had mentioned earlier in the lecture, there's great opportunities for you to venture into the infrastructure asset management industry. So that is my challenge.
Just to add to, across my clients in New Zealand, there are a good number of Filipino engineers. And obviously, they've had their professional qualifications accredited in New Zealand because of the positions they're in. And they're well respected within the New Zealand engineering profession. So that's practically what I know, is that Filipino engineers do well in New Zealand if they choose to come there, that they're able to cross-credit their qualifications in some way, and that when they're practicing, they are well respected. So
That's good to know, sir. There is actually, I would like to know, because this is one of their questions a while ago, that in terms of, say, academic qualifications, we have what we call the Sydney Accord and then the Washington Accord.
yeah.
So can you enlighten us on the difference of these two?
I think one of them deals with engineering technical qualifications and one deals with the degree with honours qualifications. So they're just at different qualification
So for
levels.
because for engineering, we are into coming up with accreditation for the Washington Accord.
Yeah. So our Washington Accord, so an example is we get a lot of South Africans come to New Zealand and they've been to the University of Stellenbosch, which is the top engineering school
So
in
is
South Africa.
New Zealand a member already?
Yes, it is, yeah. And so they have a Washington Accord degree. It's instantly recognised in New Zealand. That's what that accord's about.
Okay.
At the equivalent level as the same degree in New Zealand. So, yeah. But when you're not a Washington Accord university, then they have to check your degree qualifications. Because as you could understand, occasionally people might present a piece of paper from a university that's in the back of Panay Island that may not exist. Say I'm an engineer, and they might not have any training at all. They've paid somebody to print some paper for them. So unfortunately it happens. And that's bad of me to use a Philippines example. Maybe I should use a Nigerian example. But so you do need to check. You need to have these quality processes in place, yeah.
What about outsourcing? Is the Philippines being outsourced for New Zealand projects?
Yes, lots of them.
There are
yeah.
lots of them.
The big consulting firms in New Zealand seem to be outsourcing to India at the moment for design. But there's lots of it. The thing, there's going to be more and more of that sort of outsourcing, yeah.
Okay. For the information of the students, when we say outsourcing, you could actually work here and serve the abroad, no? Work abroad. You earn whatever the currency of the country is, no? So there's a lot of opportunities also for New Zealand. So would you like to be a resident of New Zealand?
I was trying to encourage you to stay here because of the challenges here.
No, because I was actually like implying that, of course, we have a different culture of family also. So
True.
I don't think that sometimes it's only the money part that is the salaries which is attractive.
Yeah.
The first attraction.
The thing in New Zealand, and this is I think every Filipino that comes to New Zealand finds that you see this massive salary and you convert it into pesos and you go, oh, that's a huge amount of money. But you know, in Auckland, the average house now costs 30 million pesos.
Yeah.
Average.
So that's why I was asking about outsourcing.
And the food cost is about 20 times here, and so you can't do that piece of maths. It doesn't work because the living costs in New Zealand relative to the Philippines are very high, and the taxes are very high as well, and so. You need to be careful. People get caught by they go, oh, I'm going to be earning all these pesos, but you're paying out a lot of money to live. So.
Okay, so I was actually asking about outsourcing because that's the concept that you don't have really to work abroad. You can stay in the Philippines, stay with your family. Okay, but then NZ only has 5 million population. So if you don't like seeing a lot of people, you go to New Zealand. Okay, so any more question from the body? Yes, we have an alumnus also, a private practicing engineer.
Hi, sir. I'm Raymond. No, we're in private sector and specializing in project management and quantity surveying. So in private sector, because earlier we talked about government projects and asset, no? In private sector, most of the developers and businessmen is focusing only in the return on of investment rather than the management or preservation of the structure. No, one of the reason is that in the quantity surveying aspect, if there are structures compared to this management or maintenance, it is more costly than building a new one. No. Yeah. Also, this is also considered in equipment management because there are branded equipment we can purchase at high cost, but then it will stay long. No, there are also equipment like, for example, in China that you can purchase. No, for example, in China you can purchase some equipment that you can only use for this project, the same capacity to the branded one, or like from Germany, or
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So what are New Zealand's views on this, and how will we in the future maybe impart to the younger generations?
Yeah. So. Just talking about the asset management impact on both the private sector consulting engineers and the contractors is when it's implemented, be it the national government or the provincial or the local government, their requests for the amount of information goes up because they need more data to prove that they're managing well, be it a road that you're handing over or water supply, whatever. So where previously you might have gone, here's the plans, they go, not good enough, we need more or different information. So that's quite a change. And we've been working on, in New Zealand, what we call national metadata standards. So a standard that's published that says if you provide information about a road or water supply, this is how it must be. And so that impacts everybody because everybody must provide the data electronically in the same form. But that means you might have to change your systems and processes in your own firm to do that. So that's it. What happens is you just end up more information passing around and more requirements for good quality information, and that impacts contractors, it impacts development engineers as well. In terms of do we build new, do we build old, that changes from country to country. So New Zealand's still a relatively new country. We don't have very old buildings, you know, there's 150 years, some of the oldest, and a lot of them were wood, not concrete. So the practice changes. I think there's going to be an awful lot of new building going on in the Philippines, housing and developments and shopping and commercial developments. Again, simply because your population grows. So the dynamic here will be quite different from New Zealand. And so there's only parts of New Zealand practice that are of relevance to you. As you pointed out, you know, maybe Chinese practice, not just in machinery, but in the way they've been building new cities might be more relevant to the Philippines. What I'd encourage you to do is to look out and say, oh, okay, what's happening there? Can we apply that to our local situation? And that's the way you improve practices and change your thinking about how you do things.
So just a little emphasis on infrastructure asset management, just to be clear. So in our case here, if we are to construct building, say a municipal hall, it's bidded out, then contractor starts with the construction, it's done, finished, end of contract. So in what aspect is infra asset management should come in?
Okay, so in two things happening in the building construction arena internationally. One is, and I don't know if you've heard of it, BIM, Building Information Management, which is seamless end-to-end transfer of digital files and building specifications, including 3D modelling of entire buildings and building components. So that's a big trend. It started with the big rail projects and building projects in the UK, and it's now going right around the world. And so what happens is that the project management engineers have to prepare all that information within a BIM framework, and it's useful for managing very large projects. So that is helpful for managing all the different information flows. They then transfer, in New Zealand, the local authorities have to sign off on the local government units, have to accept the buildings as being up to the required standard. So they have an audit and a review process there. So they need to receive that information and sign it off. And so that's where that process works there. But for, let's say, a mall that is privately owned, in New Zealand, that's the end of the government's process. So it's only the acceptance of the standards. But the government, local government units also own a lot of building assets themselves, stadiums and maybe a bus station or a train station and lots of libraries and municipal buildings and things like that. So they manage the life cycle of their own buildings, and they certify the private buildings, malls and houses, to being constructed to the right standard.
So do I get that to mean that there's some special body that sits and acts as an infra asset management entity?
We have a body, an infrastructure commission up at the whole of government level, and then we have each municipality would have a team, depending on the size. Sometimes it will be several or many staff, other times it might be only a few. But it's not really been, apart from the standards and the reporting, it's more of a municipal and government concern than a private concern. Apart from it changes the way that you contract work, and it changes the way that you receive information as you start thinking about it. So.
Thank you, sir, for sharing the New Zealand practices and experiences in terms of infra asset management. Any more question? Yes, sir.
In the Philippines, there is a phenomenon called brain drain. So the engineers in the Philippines tend to work for a few years. Then after that, they decide to work in other countries. So what do you think as the Philippines, what will the Philippines do in order to prevent the outflow of engineers to other countries, considering that the engineers are also assets?
So this, in the Western world, and it's not just New Zealand, it's Australia, it's the US, it's Canada, it's England. I imagine also it is France and Germany and Europe. We haven't trained enough engineers for the last 20 or 30 years. And we've still got lots of projects to do. So it becomes a bidding war internationally for talent. We lose engineers to Australia from New Zealand, we lose engineers to Canada and to the USA. Same problem. So how do you retain your own engineers? You give them interesting projects, you make sure that they are fairly remunerated, you give them honour in society for what they're building, but you're still going to lose them and you give them a vision of what they can achieve for their own families and their own country. But if people are interested in how much money they earn, the highest bidder wins. So they might end up in Saudi Arabia or the USA. And I don't think there's much you can do about that. But one of the things I have learned in life is that there is a lot more to life than just earning money. And so the reason I give a lecture like this is that you can give back to your experience and what you've learned to the next generation, to other colleagues. And so for people that take that attitude to life, they may well stay because there are some tremendous challenges here in the Philippines. If a person, all that is their driver is money, then it's unlikely that they will stay. So maybe it's around values and around contributing to your society as core values, as opposed to how much money I can earn. So.
Okay, so I think we are done for today, and we would let's give a round of applause for our speaker. Thank you very much again for the vast experience you have shared for today's seminar. And I hope that for the students especially, I've said that you are the next in line. You will become leaders in your own right later. So I hope that you integrate this in your work, no? And even start now. Do some infra asset management even in your own physical assets. Okay? So at this point, we'll now have a certificate of appreciation. I would like to give.
May I request again Engineer Grillo to assist in giving of certificate of appreciation. Let me read you the content of the certificate. Certificate of appreciation is given to Engineer Ross WAUGH for imparting his valuable knowledge and insights as the resource speaker during the lecture series on the topic Climate Change Factors in Infrastructure Asset Management, the New Zealand Experience in the Philippine Context. Signed, Engineer Mary Earl Darie Grillo, Chairperson of Civil Engineering Department. Signed, Engineer Danny C. Molina, the Dean of the College of Engineering, and signed by Dr. Irving Domingo L. Rio, the VP for Academic Affairs of Central Philippine University. Let's give them a round of applause. The same certificate is also given to Pastor Jonan C. Castillon. And now may I request all the participants to please come forward for our photo opportunity.
By the way, for those who are from outside of CPU, we have a certificate of attendance for you in a while. So if you can wait for, I have to have it signed by Ross first. So I'll give it to you then now. Okay, can we ask first those outside CPU to please come here? The LGUs from San Agustin. Sorry. Nauya-uya pa kamo eh. Okay. And our alumnus. Ang from the College of Agriculture na students, agricultural engineering, and do we have environmental science? Yeah. Okay, ang civil engineering group, 2 parts siguro, this part, and then, may ato pa. Second year, A. Second year, tanan nga second year. Okay, the last group, 5th year, OJT students.